Did you know that the way you're thinking right now, your mood, your anxious thoughts, or your happy or depressed thoughts are most likely coming from your gut?
I want to talk about this mind-body gut connection. All right, this is something that's a term that's growing more, which is wonderful. But what does it really mean at its foundation? What is this mind-body gut connection?
Did you know that the way you're thinking right now, your mood, your anxious thoughts, or your happy or depressed thoughts are most likely coming from your gut? And it's not really, you're not even consciously aware that there's something else controlling. These bacteria are actual, think of them like little people. They have personalities, they have thoughts, and they send signals like dopamine and serotonin, GABA to your brain. It's fascinating. You can actually they took schizophrenic people and they blinded the researchers, and the researchers could pick out which people had schizophrenia based on their gut microbiome alone. Knew nothing else about them. And so you can see, I mean, this is an area that we don't even think or talk about, but it is insane. So there's 100 trillion bacteria. They have more genes than stars in the universe. And they live inside and they make decisions for us. So the gut-brain connection is something that is so fascinating to me, because I was like, how can you, how do we not know about this? We don't even consider this in our studies on mental health. So anxiety, depression, feeling good can come from that gut bacterial communication with the brain. And there's 4 different ways, at least that we know of, that they communicate. So it's not just one, vagus nerve is what people think about. It's a connection between the brain and the gut. But there are lots of other ways, like the serotonin, dopamine, GABA pathway. They produce these little vesicles with messengers to the brain. So there's so many different things that are happening. It is just fascinating to me, because I don't know about, I think most people that are listening or watching want to feel happier, more focused, less anxious. And if you knew that there was another way to do it besides medications, and just, living with it, then that's kind of exciting.
Yeah. And I love this because you're somebody who's been a voice for circadian medicine and paying attention to these undertones. And it's really strange because, pharmaceutical drugs obviously have their place, but it's been the immediate go-to, instead of addressing the underlying dysfunction, like what is causing the symptom. And you mentioned something that I'm so glad that you brought up, is the fact that these bacteria, these trillions of bacteria we carry in and on our bodies, they have genes as well.
Yeah.
Right? And so we think about the human genome as determining our fate. But if we go gene for gene, 99+% of the genes that we carry are microbial.
Yeah.
And they obviously have a huge influence. And another thing that I picked up from our earlier conversation was, even when we're talking about our circadian clocks, these themselves are genes. These are clock genes that are determining when our body's doing everything that it's doing. But our microbes, our bacteria, have essentially clock genes as well, and circadian rhythms as well.
Yeah. They need to sleep too. And they need time. They follow day and night cycle. And we were talking about it, but basically, if they don't see light and dark for 24 hours, those clock genes in their body gets damaged, and they don't function the way they're supposed to. So not only are we damaging our gut bacteria by eating horrible foods with high sugar and preservatives, emulsifiers, etc., we're also putting them in a dark place for, over 24 hours, where they don't know what night and day is, and they're dying off that way.
So we need that exposure to natural light, to sunlight.
The natural light is absolutely necessary for the functioning of not only our clock genes, but also our gut bacteria's clock genes. 80% of the body's functions, at least that we know of, work on circadian input. And so one of the easiest interventions people can do is start getting more natural light in the day. And I know for me, that was like the first thing that actually made me feel better. And so people are always like, there's so many things you guys talk about, but if you really just started with getting some natural light in the morning and then maybe some natural light in the evening, you could really start to change so much of your body without changing one thing in your diet.
So what is it about getting exposure to sunlight in the morning that actually helps to kind of set your circadian timing system?
So in your eyes, you have direct receptors that go to your brain, to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And so when your retina sees natural light, so it's different than, this indoor light that we're in, it will send signals and it will say it's daytime, time to focus, time to process complex thoughts, time to get your digestion going, time for the metabolism to start working. There's signals that get sent all over the body, and it's coming from the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So your hormones and all of those processes start to calibrate. And we need that. So each cell has its own clock, but it gets input from this master clock so that it can start working properly. That's why you feel so much better when you go outside. Your brain works better. Your mood is improved. And that's why we've kind of ignored this for too long. And we were talking about Vegas before. Places where you're spending a ton of time indoors without natural light is going to damage your body in ways that we're just starting to understand now.
Yeah. And so before this show got started, we were talking about trips to Vegas. So my wife just planned a trip. The last time we went to Vegas, I've spoken in Vegas probably 4 or 5 times at some pretty epic events, but I never like stayed and like done the stuff.
Yeah.
And when my wife and I went together the last time was about 11 years ago when she was pregnant with my youngest son, and I was speaking at an event, of course, and we were getting by, but we weren't doing particularly well, and so we even flew standby to get to the event.
Yeah.
Because we have a friend who works for an airline. And
Nice.
so what standby means is that you literally stand by. I didn't really get it because when we first went from St. Louis to Vegas, we got right on the plane. It's like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah.
But coming back was a whole other story. And because of that, like we didn't get to get on the first flight. You have to wear a certain attire as well. I don't know if people know that for certain airlines, because what they told me is like, you represent the airline. So, I had to like run. I just had like a jeans and a t-shirt on. I had to run to like, there's a golf store in Las Vegas. I had to jump on a train, fly over there, get this golf outfit on. I wanted to punch myself in the face a little bit, but I threw the outfit on and I ran back, raced across the, I looked like Tiger Woods on a really bad day,
You had to
And
look
so-
the part. Yeah.
And so now we missed this flight as well. And so we ended up having to stay a night in a whole different city. And it was just this crazy ordeal because of finances. And so all these years later is a very different experience. My wife put the weekend together because for me, I'm just like, I wouldn't have any interest in going necessarily. It was like, it was cool, but whatever. Like, I like my routine. I like feeling good.
Yeah.
And everything starts at 9 p.m. Everything, And so, but the deal breaker for me that was just like, oh yeah, this is awesome, was we went to the Silk Sonic concert. Shout out to
cool.
Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak, and it was bananas. It was one of the most incredible things I've seen. And but what I saw was what we're talking about, the casino environment. So we stayed at a hotel that was connected to other casinos, and it's changed a lot. Even since I went last time, there's a lot less smoking environments, than when we went last time. But just this atmosphere, these very strange lights and sounds
Right.
can really start to throw off your body's rhythm. It's like your body essentially, we haven't evolved with those kind of inputs. And so people are there from dusk till dawn at their slot machines or at their tables, and they lose track, like their body gets so discombobulated.
Yeah, and it's so, I don't think we understood the impact of that. Of course, it's great for the casino owners because we're discombobulated. We kind of don't know when to sleep, when to wake up, what, we don't feel good. So we're just kind of eating and drinking more to see, maybe that makes us feel better. And really that kind of, you can actually damage the clock genes in your cells to the point where they don't work anymore. And so this is not just about, you went for a day or two, that's fine. But people who are doing this all the time. Right. And, during the pandemic, what I noticed is a lot of the children were indoors all the time. And I had to tell my kids, you have to go outside, even though everything's online. And, during their breaks, they would be on their iPad or on their phone. You have to go outside. It's so important for children to get that input of circadian rhythms. And that doesn't come from even a window. Yeah. It comes from natural light.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, because this is the collateral damage that's not getting talked about, especially for children. And the CDC published a report looking at some of the outcomes just recently, even one came out last week. And we'll put a couple up for people to see if they're watching the video version. But they were looking at the mental health outcomes for children, adolescents, and almost half of the children analyzed, teens, had depressive thoughts of, and also like 1 out of 5 had thoughts of suicide, suicidal contemplation. And the numbers just jumped up mightily. It had already been climbing in recent years, but it just took this mighty jump. But I'm bringing this up to say another CDC report looked at childhood obesity. And I want to ask you about this as well. And what they found was that childhood obesity took a gigantic leap during this time of shutdowns and mandates. And children who were moderately obese, and again, we'll put this study up for people to see, published by the CDC, children with moderate levels of obesity, their annual rate of weight gain doubled. So it went from around 6 pounds annually increase to 12 pounds in just that short span. And it's just like, again, we're getting this feedback that something is seriously awry here. And we might see that, it's a short-term thing. But then we have recidivism, where like you pick up these things when you're a child, it becomes ridiculously, exponentially more difficult to address than when you get older. So I wanted to ask you about this, because part of regulating our metabolic rate and our insulin sensitivity comes from being aligned with the certain clock and sun exposure and those kind of things. So how has thrown off our children's rhythm been playing into challenges with body composition and obesity?
Absolutely. Obesity is so closely linked with circadian rhythms as well. Insulin levels. So we know that our ability to process sugar changes throughout the day, and we need those circadian rhythms to kind of help the body know that you should process sugar during the day. And usually around 8 o'clock, we notice that your ability to process sugar goes much lower. And so if you are following circadian rhythms, you can actually improve blood sugar control and reduce obesity by, educating people on this circadian pattern. But there's so much, that goes into obesity. So one is, these brain pathways that are getting set. Like you said, things that we are doing as children get set as neurological pathways. Our brain wants to be efficient. And so it figures out, when, you're hungry, you have this junk food and it satisfies this craving, it's going to become a pathway. And so a lot of people will notice when they're adults, they still kind of go back to those comfort foods of childhood and as go-tos when they're stressed or when they're not feeling good. And it's because these pathways were set as a child, and it's really hard to break it. And that's what we're doing when we're increasing the amount of drive-thrus and processed foods that we're having. We're setting these patterns that are often lifelong for people. So, we talk about trauma, as child that carries through the years. It's the same thing. Of course, not to minimize trauma, but you can actually program your brain to want certain foods, to go to certain things for comfort, because the brain wants to create easy ways to comfort our bodies and our brains. And so we end up creating these horrible habits. 56% of Americans say that they have problems with their mental health right now. Anxiety prescriptions have gone up. anxiety medication prescriptions have gone up 30%. Antidepressant prescriptions have gone up 26%. I mean, we are the unhappiest we've been in 50 years. So we're definitely noticing that there's something beyond just what the external events that are happening to us. So not only are we getting fatter, but we're also getting sadder. So it's really,
Wow. Oh, wow. But the good news is we can do something about this, but
yeah.
it's gonna take a lot of work
Yeah, I
because
wish there was
there's
like a one pill deal with this,
yeah.
but it's not.
It's the systems that are governing all of this. I mentioned that the CDC is the one who reported with childhood obesity, and yet they've also been the propagator of mandates that resulted in that particular manifestation. It's just like we have to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. And this is also true because this is the next thing I want to talk to you about, which circles back to you mentioned these pathways getting created with these certain food inputs, but that also involves that psychological connection with what's happening with the gut.
Yeah.
Because guess where that food is hitting when you're having that processed food? It's affecting our microbiome. So how does this all tie in with our kind of, feelings of, our cravings, our emotions, our mental health when it comes to the food that we're eating in relationship to our gut health?
So cravings are different than hunger, and our gut bacteria often dictate that. So sometimes you're craving something not because you're craving it, but your gut bacteria are craving it. And when you're eating a ton of, say, during the first part of the pandemic, you might have done takeout a lot. You might have been eating a lot of fast foods, and say your gut bacteria now are growing. The ones that like the sugar and the processed foods are growing, and the ones that like the broccoli and the vegetables or whatever are scarce and dying off. Those bacteria will ask for more, and they will send signals to your brain as a craving for the foods that they like. And so those gut bacteria start to rule your thoughts. And those, okay, so dopamine is a molecule of motivation. And when it comes to food, alcohol, and drugs, this can be a very powerful motivation. It can be a negative or a positive, because dopamine is also the one that motivates you to do better, to challenge yourself, to compete. But it's also the one that makes you get up out of this chair, take and go get a food or an alcoholic drink or a drug, because you are craving it so bad that you will motivate yourself to go get that. And so it can be so powerful in a negative or positive way, but we don't get any education around that. And so in schools, even in medical school, we really didn't learn that there is, when you see a patient or you're talking to someone, educate them about their gut bacteria, because maybe they'll understand, it'll motivate them more to eat the healthier foods, to get more sunlight, to get better sleep, because they'll say, oh, then those bacteria actually will start to change your cravings and will start to, want different foods. But we don't know that, and we don't talk about it. But the food companies know that, and they know that if they motivate you with the dopamine, the more they can motivate you, the more you will buy their product. And it's a secret that I think everyone should know, so we can stop our cravings. For example, I'll give you an example. My kids, I was educating them about this, because I don't think anybody really tells them, because they just think that they love chips or cookies, but they don't really know why, right? So I was telling them that there's these, at Trader Joe's, they have these like rolled tortilla chips that I got once, because it's like a healthier version of Takis, okay? And when I explained this dopamine pathway, I said, there are some foods that you want so badly that when you get it, it's almost like pleasure mixed with discomfort. It's like you love it so much, but you're like, when am I going to get more? It's like this almost uncomfortable with pleasure feelings, not pure pleasure. And they identified those. They said, "Oh yeah, it's like when you get those when you bring those chips home, it's like you want to have more, but you can't, and then can't wait till the next time. It's like it's almost an uncomfortable feeling, and that's when you're tapped into that dopamine pathway, and that's alcoholism, and that's the craving for drugs, and that's how you know you're addicted, or not addicted, but you have that dopamine pathway trigger with certain foods or activities or pleasures. And that's what you have to watch yourself around, because that can be a negative thing.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So you mentioned this, which should be Captain Obvious at this point, but not being taught this in medical school, of asking patients about certain things like this and educating them about their microbiome health. And you've had the opportunity to be educated at some of the most prestigious institutions in the world, Cornell and Columbia and Harvard. And and I want to do a lot more right now. And I've been working for years on this subject, and I'm working with some great people at Harvard and at NYU and Stanford to help to change some of this in the education, because the outcomes, it's not necessarily just a lack of education for what physicians and nurse practitioners are able to teach patients, but it's what they're being taught themselves.
Yeah.
And I want you to, if you could, talk about this culture that's been created and encouraged in healthcare of just absolutely demolishing one's health in the name of achieving a certain status or education. It's
Absolutely.
a very, this culture, the reason I'm bringing this up is I really feel like one of our greatest leverage points is to help to heal healers and to help folks who are entrusted with taking care of the public, doing something to take care of themselves. Because, as you know, and if you can articulate this, the levels of stress, the processed food consumption, the sleep deprivation, all of these things becoming commonplace for our healthcare practitioners, and wondering why the education isn't reaching the patient.
Absolutely. I think what happens is you also get these dopamine pathways, or these set neural pathways, because during our grueling years of training, we are told that if you sleep, you're lazy. If you leave early and you go to work out, you're lazy, or you're not a good doctor. Especially in residency training, it was kind of like a hazing where it was who can stay the latest, who can get the least sleep, who is the most dedicated resident. And Boston was a very toxic environment in that way for me, because it was dark outside. You never really knew, you're never really getting out early enough to get sunlight anyway. And there's this kind of competition of who can work the hardest, who can work the longest, who can work the most shifts. And it's so toxic, because it's teaching people that you have to trash your body in order to be someone that's respectful or respected. And what you're taught is that food is basically a fuel to get you to the next thing. Like, we would eat these, so they had these like graham crackers and like peanut butter packets that they would save for patients when their blood sugar would be low, and literally we would eat those to kind of sustain ourselves to the next meal. And it was, meals were provided were insanely processed. And so you're living that life, and then you graduate and you're supposed to tell people how to be healthier when you have basically trashed your body for the last 20 years. And so it was so when I was at my peak in my field, really, finished all this training and double board certified and got my first job, became a partner, and I was supposed to be at my peak on the outside, I was at my lowest on the inside. I felt exhausted. I felt like my gut health was so poor. My mind was always anxious and running all the time, never in the moment, because at that point I had convinced myself that doing these things, getting sunlight, getting sleep, getting exercise, was something that I didn't have time for, or that I shouldn't make time for, because I'm a busy mom, doctor, and I'm dedicated, and that meant that you have to skimp on those things. So really, it's so pervasive in the culture, and there's almost like you kind of the older attendings, we call them, the senior people, they'll say, oh, in my day, we worked 100-hour weeks. You guys only have to work 80-hour weeks. And it's just insane that you can do that. You can tell people that that's normal and then expect them to come out of that without mental health disease, without physical health disease, and without, some kind of, they're not prepared to counsel people on health and nutrition when you're not living it yourself. You really can't counsel. I couldn't, even being a nutrition major in college, I had lost all of that during my training years in medicine. And then I was out in the real world, and medicine today still does not have a nutrition component to the standard medical visit for most. And now, things are changing because I graduated medical school in 2004. And so it's been almost 20 years. And so things have changed rapidly, and I think it's going in the right direction. But as you know, we're sorely late to the game, and we have a lot more work to do. And that's why people look to other sources for guidance, because they're not really getting it sometimes from their medical provider.
Yeah. And thank you so much for that, because this has even helped to birth your amazing book, So Effing Tired.
Yeah.
And sharing your story. And you proactively, this is the unfortunate scenario. You've got to figure this stuff out on your own when you're, investing in the most prestigious education that you can get. But then what does that even equal if you lose yourself and your health?
Right.
And so I'm really hoping to help make a shift in this. And I know that we can. As you mentioned, things are changing.
Yeah.
And it's taking some really kind of pioneering voices and a lot of intention, a lot of work, because as systems exist and they just kind of coast along, unless something outrageous happens, and especially if people are making money from the system, it's very difficult to change it. And it's kind of, COVID has come along and really shaken things up and disrupted things. It's creating a great opportunity for things to change. And I want to ask you about this, because if we look at the health outcomes, because we've got the data on this stuff now, if we look at the health outcomes of nurses versus the general population, higher rates of cancer, higher rates of insulin resistance, physicians having the highest rate of substance abuse of any other field.
Yeah.
And partially, of course, we're looking at the environment, but also the accessibility to drugs.
Yeah.
And these things are not being talked about, the mental health issues. And so if we're going to really heal as a nation and as a species, we've got to address this, because, right now, if we look at the outcomes of our population overall, we are the sickest nation in the history of humanity. If we're talking about chronic diseases, it's unbelievable. We don't have to look very far to see the results. But this goes back to what are the inputs. And so for you, if you could talk a little bit about what, once you had this revelation, I've done all this stuff, but I feel like this is the outcomes that I'm having. What was the first kind of steps that you were taking to address that? What got you to think outside of the box that you were taught to think in and start to address getting yourself well?
I was always interested in the gut microbiome and the immune system interplay, because in my family, everyone kind of dies at a young age. 60 is the average age, and there's heart disease and there's diabetes. And these are smallish Indian men and women. I mean, they don't look unhealthy. And a lot of this disease came when they moved to the US. And even though they had a pretty high carbohydrate diet, vegetarian diet in India, when they moved, something changed. And it was always interesting to me. I was wondering, is it, of course it was the food. There's a lot more Coke and Pepsi, Pizza Hut's visits, but there was also a shift in their lifestyle. They're sitting more at desk jobs because they were trying to hustle and make money. And so it was always fascinating to me, what is happening? What is going on in the body that is, we don't understand? And at that time, nutrition was not popular at all. It was considered a soft science. Nobody really in the serious academic world was talking about nutrition like it is now. And so that, when I started to make my shift, I thought to myself, what is it that I'm doing wrong that's making me feel like crap, that's making me gain weight, even though I'm working out, that's making my sleep so poor that I can't even sleep through the night? And so I started to look into, I kept thinking it must be my hormones, my immune system, or my gut. And then I realized that they're all three intertwined in one. And that's when I started to really be interested in circadian rhythms and gut bacteria. So one thing I wanted to share is I remember the reason I went to immunology fellowship is this concept of the hygiene hypothesis. So for people who don't know, at the turn of the century around in London, some smart doctors started to notice that the kids, the rich kids living in London, were starting to have a lot of problems, health problems, allergies, asthma, autoimmune things. And the kids who were poor, quote unquote poor kids living on the farm still in the outskirts of London, weren't having those issues. And so it started a series of investigations of what's going on when you move from a rural farm environment to an urban environment. And that work is still going on because we don't know, right? Like even the immigrant thing that I was telling you, we don't know exactly what's changed and what's bad. But what they found is one of the biggest things that changed is that the kids, the rich kids, had a cleaner life. They were around less bacteria. They had less siblings in the home, less animals, less dirt, less exposure to nature. And, of course, they had more refined foods, less stuff right from the farm, right? So they created this hypothesis, which is still the leading hypothesis of why our immune system and gut bacteria go haywire, called the hygiene hypothesis, that we need bacteria, we need dirt, we need farm, or we need something about that old environment to populate our gut and teach our immune system. And it's so fascinating. So when I was thinking to myself, like, I need to go back to some of those basic things that I used to do as a kid or as a young adult when I felt good, because for some reason I feel like this gut immune hormone connection is, we don't know exactly what it is, but there's something about it. So I just started to spend a little more time outdoors, started to learn about circadian rhythms, started to eat more closer to the source, less refined foods. And of course, as you know, once you start eating a little better, all of a sudden your thoughts change. Your mood changes. You start to have ideas of like, okay, I hate what I'm doing on a daily basis. I need to start to do some creative work. So it starts, right? That gut brain connection is so clear in most people. And then I just kind of made a side turn, which was not the best decision financially. It was not the best decision for my career in terms of like my medical career. I could open more clinics. I could work more, it really was. People were looking at me like, what the heck is she doing? Like she could literally, be like making millions. But really what I wanted to do is figure out what was working and what wasn't working so I could share that. And I knew that that's something that could really help impact a lot of people.
Yeah. And of course, in the long term, the impact that you are making is remarkable. And I just want to acknowledge you for doing that because, especially when we have so much invested in a certain way of thinking and living, it can be incredibly difficult to shift gears and to just acknowledge when something's not working. And let me double down on this when people around you are just like, you're crazy. Like, What are you doing? You've got such and such. But I think it's really anchored in the fact of like, once you start to actually feel good and you are in this state and like you can't identify what it is, other healthcare professionals are telling you like, oh, it's just this and that and nothing happens to work, and you figure that thing out, it creates a level of authority in you that you can't really even describe with words. And you mentioned this hygiene hypothesis, and this is kind of not contrary, but it's another angle of the gene theory of disease. I'm sorry, the germ theory
Yeah.
of disease, which, you know, when this came about, because we went from, things like the miasmatic theory of disease, like it's bad air
Yeah. Yeah.
is killing you, but the germ theory, once we were able to identify, like, oh, there's these little microbial things that are the cause of
Yeah.
all of our problems.
Yeah.
And then the world went to war, the world of medicine went to war with trying to kill these very small things, not understanding we're made from those very small things. So indiscriminately killing the stuff that we're actually made of. And like, look where that has brought us. We went too far. Not to say that certain microbes can't be harmful to us, but often we put this label of they're opportunistic.
Yeah.
That means when the opportunity is presented, when there's a deficiency within the system or there's a degradation or something isn't working right, like, basic immune function, that's when the thing can get on top of you. But a healthy, sovereign system requires a good balance of microbes. And the question I want to ask you about is that this still it still circles back to gut health, because the vast majority of our immune system is
Yeah. In our gut.
in our
And
gut.
not only is our immune system in our gut bacteria are constantly talking to our immune system, and they are in communication at all times. And so when you say inflammation, it's that gut bacteria telling the immune system, hey, there's something wrong here. Tell the body. So it creates these interleukins, like interleukin 17 will say to the brain, hey, there's something going on here. We're inflamed. We need some time to rest. And that's why, when you are sick, you'll kind of feel down or tired or want to sleep, because it's this inflammatory signals that came to the brain that said, hey, we need to concentrate on what's going on here. We can't be doing all the things that you want to do. We got to fix this issue. And unfortunately, a lot of us are living in this inflamed state a lot of the time. And so that immune system, gut and hormone connection is so strong that people don't even realize that, oh, when, your hormones are imbalanced, it really means your gut is imbalanced, and it means your immune system is imbalanced. And so it's all one. It's not like you can fix it by just replacing the hormone or giving an adrenal cocktail, or this is, people make millions and billions of dollars of supplements to support the hormone system or to boost the immune system. And what they don't understand, it all comes down to that interplay in that gut.
Yeah. And again, it's like another band-aid treatment,
Right.
instead of like what is causing the issue at its core. And I love that you mentioned that. Like, I think everybody can relate to that. Like, if you come down with something and just your mood is lower,
Yeah.
you're not really feeling as motivated, but also coming out of it, once you start to feel better, like when you get over maybe a cold or a flu or something like that, like you feel amazing.
Yeah.
It's just like that's that neurochemistry that's
Yeah.
linking back up, and your body's like, okay, immune system job, we've done this. Here's some more energy that we can dedicate towards your cognition and your motivation.
Yeah, that's why when you start fixing that gut bacteria, which, by the way, starts happening at 3 days, if you rapidly change your diet and your lifestyle, you all of a sudden feel like you're waking up to thoughts that you really weren't able to process before. And for me, and I know this is probably true for you, for me, that meant, hey, I gotta shift gears here. I can't just, I was kind of in this blind routine, automated mode of do this in the morning, do this in it. And it was like you just rinse and repeat all day. And most people are in that mode. They can relate, right? So a lot of people use the weekends to kind of use alcohol or drugs or escapism so that they can kind of get out of this routine state, and then they start all over on Monday, right? So it's a way to say, hey, maybe you try this for a couple days and see, maybe you have better ideas about what's going on in your life. Maybe you make some changes. Maybe relationships, maybe jobs or friends aren't serving you anymore. Maybe there's thoughts or patterns that you want to change. And that's a great way to get on a population level, get people to start making changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the thing that, and it wasn't until a few years ago that I really looked at this. the thing that was most unexpected when I was focusing on getting myself physically healthy, when I was 20 years old, very similar situation, being told that this thing I'm experiencing is normal in a sense, like there's nothing I can really do about it. It's part of the process. For me, what was normalized was I had this so-called incurable arthritic condition in my spine, in my bone density, and just like told or programmed to believe that this was incurable. There's nothing I can do about it. And through the process of changing my thinking around this and getting myself well, I was just trying to get physically well and get out of pain. And when I started to give these new inputs into my body, what I was feeding my gut bacteria, which I had no idea about, wasn't thinking anything about that. I was just trying to lose weight.
Yeah, yeah.
But doing that in an efficacious manner where I was like, okay, my body, in order to regenerate my spine and my bone density, I need the raw materials that are coming from foods that I was so deficient in, because at the time I was living in Ferguson, Missouri, surrounded by fast food and processed food that I ate, and I'm not exaggerating, every single meal of every day. I was made out of shit, like the worst possible. And wondering why I'm in such pain and I'm not getting well. When I started to provide my body with those raw materials to regenerate the tissues, because your body, we're scratching the surface in understanding the intelligence of the human body. Your body knows what to do so far beyond our capacity to understand it. But once I started to provide these base nutrients and changing some of the things I was doing during the day, my movement practices, what I didn't realize was just how much my mind changed.
Yeah.
And I started to become much more optimistic, and I started to see solutions. Whereas, like, I know people know somebody like this, everybody does, somebody who's got a problem for every solution. And so I started to see a solution to every problem. Matter of fact, multiple solutions. Matter of fact, I realized that all this time, these things were available. I just wasn't attuned to them, And the point I wanted to make was what changed the most, that was most unexpected, was my standards for relationships. And I had no idea, part of the process of being unwell was like being in unhealthy relationship, in unhealthy relationships. And now just like, I was just done. I was just like, I'm not going to associate. I'm not going to tolerate. I'm not going to, even participate in the behaviors that I was engaging in as a young man in college,
Yeah.
And it's just like, I got so dedicated. I just wanted to help people, because part of that too was once I got better, and this is what happened with you, I wanted to tell everybody about it.
Yeah.
And so I got so focused on that, my mind changed because I was getting myself healthier, and I didn't realize why that happened.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the relationship part of health, because I don't think we talk about that enough. And we already know that the longest living people around the world, these centenarians, people who live 100 plus years, that are healthy living 100 plus years, they name connection, relationships, as one of the main things that seem to keep them going on a daily basis. And I think that having good relationships is such a key part of health that we don't even talk about. We talk about in medicine, in the wellness world, we talk about fitness as health. That's basically all we talk about. We don't even talk about mind health. Maybe we're starting to now. We don't talk about relationship health. And that's something that is such a key part of health. So learning which people, both, in your personal relationships with a spouse or a loved one, with your family, with your friends, who are the people that you can help and that can support you, and to understand what these what you're doing that may be wrong and how you can help them, and vice versa. Recognizing when you're around toxic people or people that are bringing your health and your mental health down, and really getting rid of that energy towards them is something that you can improve your health in ways you don't even understand. I mean, that thought of you are the product of the people that you spend the most time with, biologically that makes sense, because you pick up their gut bacteria, you pick up their habits, and we know that your gut bacteria determine how you think, how you feel. And so when you're spending time with people, you're really picking up a lot of their microbiome too.
Wow. Thank you for bringing that up because we've got data on this now too. Your gut bacteria is much more correlated and like your spouse
Yeah.
than it is your siblings
Yeah.
or your parents,
Yeah.
right? So it just really articulates that your environment has a huge impact on your gut health and also just your out picturing of your health. And I wanted to bring this up too because you mentioned in our society we're really, we've got this week framework and then, get to the weekend and it's like these kind of dual realities. And but the thing is we just made this up. Like we even the days of the week, like it's a socially accepted agreement on how we've structured things as a society. And what tends to happen is we'll follow the rules, the quote rules, social rules through the week. And the weekend comes around, it's just like, I'm free.
Yeah.
And then we throw off our rhythms and our routines and our patterns. And then come Monday morning, when we have to get back to the quote rules, we experience this social jet lag.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I don't know how long it's been since you've stayed up late and partied, but I don't do it that often anymore, right? But when I do, I'm reminded of how a lot of people live like this on a every week basis, where most of our thoughts are automated anyway, but a lot of people live in a very automated state where they're not present in the moment. And I think you can relate, and I can relate. When you're driving, you don't even know you're driving. You're just driving to the place that you have memorized, and your brain knows, your body knows. And so you're living in this automated state where you're not in the moment. You're just kind of in your head all the time. And then you go to the weekend where you basically try to, relax, but relax sometimes means, staying up late, having a lot of alcohol or drugs or whatever, food. And you basically have created a situation in your brain and your body where it's doesn't know what time it is. It doesn't know. You're feeling jet lagged. The next day is perpetually jet lagged. And you're really never getting to the point where you're in that moment where, a lot of meditation and mindfulness is really just bringing you back into the present moment, because so many of us spend our weeks, the entire week, not in the present moment, because we have learned behaviors and unconsciously just do everything. And then on the weekends, we are never able to catch up with that nature time, that relaxation, that good food. And so you're trashing your body and your brain again on the weekend. You wake up on Monday morning and you're exhausted, you're jet lagged, and you're kind of going back into that automated thoughts process again. And it's like a perpetual cycle. And I know I was there. So I don't know if you can relate, but I was there. I just went through the motions of the day. I did everything I needed to do, but I really wasn't in the moment. And then the weekends I spent kind of trashing my body. And then Monday, it was back to the same grind again. And it's like you never actually were alone with your thoughts at any point. You were never actually thinking about how to break patterns that weren't serving you. And your circadian rhythms were completely thrown off because, you stayed up half the night and now you have to wake up at, 6 or 7 a.m. again. It's a pattern that we've created with society that most people can kind of relate to, that we can easily make changes to. If I always say, like, smart entrepreneurs will change the world. We already know that there's innovation. And when you know this information, you can start creating solutions for people that are easier, that are streamlined, that you can wake up out of this kind of fog that's leading us to poor mental health, to obesity, to disease.
Yeah, wake up is a good term
to
use, And so this reminds me of a really interesting study, and I talked about this in Eat Smarter in my latest book. And we'll put the study up for people to see. But the researchers were wanting to see what happens with your microbiome when changing time zones, when altering people's sleep cycles. And so this is a human study. And so they had folks, basically changing time zones, crossing multiple time zones and having their stool sample before and after, and they could see just by altering their sleeping schedule and their body in association to the sun and the entire galaxy really is what.
Yeah.
And humans had the thing is, what I want to reiterate is we haven't been able to do this throughout our evolution. We're talking again, the earth has been around, according to the latest science, a couple billion years, but only within about a century have we been able to like literally take our body, pluck it from one place, and then fly it across the globe and plop it down in another. Something that would take, months of travel to achieve can happen in a few hours. And so the disorientation that takes place with our body in relationship to the solar system is remarkable. And so not that we can't do this and have a good time, but we need to be anchored in understanding this is new.
Yeah.
And we probably need to stack conditions in our favor to help our bodies to adjust. And so what they found was that after altering their time schedule and their body in association to the solar system, what happened was in their stool samples, they found increased prevalence of bacteria associated with insulin resistance, obesity, diabetes, altering their gut bacteria that quickly to being as someone who is experiencing those states of disease. Good news is, once they got them back onto a normal sleep schedule, the things resolved. But who is perpetually living in that state? And are we doing this to ourselves with this social jet lag, constantly throwing off our rhythms just because of, it's this thing going on? And I don't want to create a neurosis here where we can't go out and kick it and do stuff. But I'm just saying, if we're proactively doing this on a regular basis and wondering why we're not getting the results we want with our, with our blood sugar being healthy, with our weight, with our mental health, these are the core things. Like it's not just you're making this decision to, do this thing. It is at its core, it's affecting your gut bacteria like instantaneously, which is going to have an outpicturing on your health. And so this leads into the question, if you could articulate this, because you're somebody who, for me, is a leading voice in the subject matter. What is circadian medicine and circadian nutrition? Like, what are they? What did they do?
Our bodies work on this day and night cycle, and so much of our metabolism, how we digest food, how we process medications. For example, blood pressure medications given day versus night have a huge difference in their impact because even our metabolism of foods and medications changes throughout the day. And so understanding how important, we have talked about daylight savings a little bit before, but, one shift of one less hour of sleep, that Monday, there's a spike, 22% spike in heart attacks, in car accidents. We know that our body really is finely attuned. I mean, 1 hour of lost sleep, and we're doing this on the weekends with 3-4 hours of shifting our sleep. So you can imagine what havoc it's wreaking on all of our bodily functions when we're shifting our rhythms all the time. We're not getting enough sleep. We are not sleeping at the right times. We're not eating at the right times. We're not getting enough input to our brains, and it impacts not only our insulin, it impacts our brain function. It impacts, as you knew, the heart attack and our ability to have higher reflexes. I kind of remember this feeling all the time when I would work an overnight shift and then you'd come back home and then you'd wake up and you were completely disoriented. And I remember that I was literally had people got into accidents all the time, both car accidents and physical. Your reflexes are just not working when your circadian rhythms are disturbed. So reflexes, heart disease, insulin levels, I mean, you name it, and it gets damaged or disrupted by circadian rhythm imbalance. So that's something that we've left on the table. Only in, I think it was 2017, the Nobel Prize in Medicine went to Jeffrey Hall and colleagues about their circadian rhythms, the molecular effects of circadian rhythm. So we're literally, it's brand new science that we're just learning about now. And ever since Jeffrey Hall and his colleagues kind of came out with this information, it's just opened this whole new world, because now we're like, oh wait, it affects your gut health, oh wait, it affects your brain health, oh wait, every single thing goes back to can be linked back to circadian rhythms.
That's so powerful. So the timing of things affects everything, basically. So when you're taking even medication, there are ideal times to take things. That's now being addressed and affirmed. Our food, when we're eating, it's going to influence everything about us, but also our bodies themselves can essentially, and I want to ask you about this, our individual template is going to determine when's best time for us to eat. Like,
Yeah.
I think it goes both ways, I
Yeah.
would imagine.
Yeah, you want to use the sun. I always tell people, it's like you don't have to go back to hunter-gatherer days and pack once the sun goes down, you're done for the evening. It's just not practical in our lives right now. But use it as a rough guide to kind of think about it evolutionarily. That we're learning more and more that, hey, when the sun goes down and it's late in the evening, you probably want to wrap up and not have your huge meal like at 10 p.m. You probably want to have your biggest meals during the daytime when your digestion is strongest. And Eastern medicine knew this all the time, right? They always talk about eating your meals in midday. Ayurveda talks about midday meals trying to be your biggest. Between 12 and 5 should be kind of where you eat the most food. So they knew that intuitively thousands of years ago, and we're starting to learn that again now. And so you can see, it's like waking. If I woke you up in the middle of the night and I asked you to do a complex math problem, you may not get it right, or you may get it right and then you're pissed because I woke you up in the middle of the night. And then when you wake up the next day, you're exhausted because you got woken up in the middle of the night. And that's how our body, our metabolism works when you try to have that huge meal late at night. And I know personally, I have experienced this, and I don't know if you have, eating super big meal late at night, right before bed. It is terrible for your sleep, for your digestion, and you wake up the next day almost like hungover, and your insulin levels are really disrupted. So just learning these things and people probably can relate, but they were never told to do anything differently.
Yeah, you're bringing up so many things that we've all experienced, but we don't really put language to.
Right.
So we're looking at circadian medicine, really paying attention to when our genes, which again, we have these clock genes that are now being affirmed that control what other genes do, that control what our proteins do based on the time it is, or our body trying to sort out what time it is. Because that's the thing about humans, we can just manufacture the time of day we want in a superficial way. It's not true. We're just we can try to hide out basically from nature, but your body's always trying to get synced up again with life itself. And so again, even our inputs with exercise, with sleep, our genes are expecting certain inputs that will give us certain outcomes based on when we're doing these things. And really this interesting phenomenon, you mentioned this, what happens with this daylight savings phenomenon we've been experiencing it's been about 100 years now that it's been something utilized in popular culture. Specifically, if we're talking about here in the US, World War I, towards the end of that, it was implemented, but then it was taken away. And then World War II, same thing. It was under the guise of saving energy was what it was supposed to be for. This was never about human biology and health. And it was actually deemed to be, quote, wartime. That was what they called it, these time changes, because it was implemented during these times of war. And it's just like we've been at war with our health ever since. And you mentioned this uptick when we go to daylight savings time where we're losing an hour in traffic accidents. We see over 20% increase in things like strokes and heart attacks. But another thing is this increased incidence of adverse events taking place in healthcare settings. More mistakes with, whether it's a procedure or medication. Like, again, because we really are throwing off the system and we're not showing up as our best self. And oftentimes we're proactively doing this to ourselves and don't realize it. But this, I think the reason it's getting tracked is because it's a big societal database.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about, recently there's been litigation pushed through, it's already passed the Senate, the Sunshine Protection Act, to abolish this time change, right? So, which is a great first step. But you live in Arizona, where it's one of the two states that are just like, we're not participating in this time change in the first place. The other place is Hawaii. But you have more access to sunlight at a longer span than a lot of other places in the US. So I want to know your thoughts on the Sunshine Protection Act. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks for articulating it so well. Our bodies, no matter what your job is, whether you work night shift, day shift, and we live in a 24/7 society now, your body still works on circadian rhythms day and night. So people always say to me, as night shift workers, like, oh, well, can I just shift my circadian rhythms? No, like you will never be able to shift your body's entire genome into a nighttime animal. You'll never get adjusted. Every time you see that sunlight, natural light, you get readjusted to day and night. We're just built that way. So you have to work around that. And so,
wait, so you're saying we are not in fact owls?
yes, we
All right.
cannot switch, like people will say, like, can't I switch my circadian rhythm? And you cannot. I mean, you can shift it slowly, right? But you really can't go from become a nocturnal human. So when it comes to daylight savings time, it's a very, like you said, when you travel time zones, it's a huge hit to your body in so many ways. So we're basically doing that purposely when we shift the time for people when with daylight savings time. So I'm a huge fan of keeping the times stable throughout the year. So that's one thing, because you really don't want to be shifting people's time zones twice a year, more so than they're already experiencing through travel, through disrupted circadian rhythms of their daily life. Once we understand the science, we have to make better options in society. It's only been 24/7 drive-throughs weren't even available even when I was a kid. I don't remember that. There's very few things that were open all night, and there wasn't Uber Eats, all night long. And so we have to remember that the circadian disruption has been so rapid and so life-changing in the last 20 years. And then we're adding to that a stress of daylight savings time, and that can be so disruptive. So I'm a huge fan of not doing any time changes. But when it comes to what time is appropriate, why are we sticking to a daylight saving schedule? It's just puzzling to me, because biologically that makes no sense. We should be staying on the circadian day and night standard time that our bodies are attuned to, so that we can have health outcomes that are better than we had. If you tell people that you are perpetually going to be in a different time zone than your body, that's going to create health problems, and problems that we won't even see for many years now.
Yeah. We were talking about this before the show a little bit, but during the shortest day of the year in New York City, if we, as of now, with the times changing and having standard time and daylight savings time, during the shortest day of the year, December 21st, the sun would rise currently at 7:30 a.m. in New York City. If this bill passes through its completion and we stay on daylight savings time, the sun will now rise on that same day for New Yorkers at 8:30 a.m. And under the guise of like, oh, we're going to get an extra hour of sunlight after work as we're sitting in traffic on the way home, but then I get it. Like, of course, like it's a socially accepted thing. We want to have a little bit more daylight to do stuff. I understand that. But biologically, we need more light in the morning and less light in the evening. And we're altering our clocks to stay on that time, which is, again, it's pushing us more into abnormality. But the ultimate thing, I really appreciate the fact that we're looking at stopping switching times, but we're not looking at what's ideal.
Right. And the biology of circadian rhythms, like I said, it's such a new, but kind of blew this world open, the science. And now that we understand what an impact it has, we really need to listen to what the science is telling us, which is very clear that our reflexes, our metabolism, hormones are going to be impacted in a negative way if you keep switching our circadian rhythms. Some of it's under our control, and some of it comes from, external governmental sources, like, time changes like this.
Yeah. So if everybody listening, if you can contact your representative, implore them to, yes, let's keep the time from changing, but let's go with standard time versus
Yeah.
daylight savings time. And in closing, I want to ask you about this because I know a lot of folks want to know this stuff from the person themselves, but what does your morning routine look like
Yeah.
for Dr. Amy Shah?
I have really refined this over the years because, I didn't allow myself. So I used to, one day I had off in the morning and I went to a morning workout class. It was at 9 a.m. And I said to the people exiting that class, "You're so lucky. I mean, I wish I could work out in the mornings, but I can't, I might have to go to work." And one of the women in that class said, "Well, aren't you a doctor? Like, couldn't you change your schedule? Couldn't you tell your admin or your front desk, or just, maybe leave a little time for a workout in the morning?" And it was so eye-opening to me. I was like, wow, you you do have the power. Like, if you wanted to say, okay, I'm going to get up, either you get up an hour earlier or you make time in the morning. So it's not at 9 a.m., but it's early in the morning that I get up. First thing I do, after I wash my face, I do look at my phone because I'm a mom and I'm a doctor and I have to check for any emergencies overnight. So I usually just check to make sure that there was no serious things, family, friends, everybody's safe. And then I put it away. Then I go and get some natural light first thing in the morning. And that's a time to do some mindset work, because mindset work doesn't need to be 60 minutes of meditation. I think that was like like a revelation to me that, I don't need to sit down for 60 minutes. I can just do like 2-3 minutes in the morning and get some natural light. So most of the time I will get dressed and do a fasted workout outdoors, or I will do partially my mindset work and a few minutes outdoors, and then go to a workout indoors, and it's kind of an open air workout. And my whole goal is maybe to have a little bit of time after the workout to kind of reset my circadian rhythms and also reset for the day. Do some that exercise of being in the now in nature, so that you can your creative thoughts come when you're not distracted. And most of the day we spend distracted with our phones, driving, work, whatever it is, internet. And so I try to spend a couple of minutes, it's so hard, undistracted, just in the moment, maybe just walking, something that doesn't require a lot of attention. And do that every morning. And I usually stay fasted with just water until that point. And so usually it's at least 2 hours into the day before I have my first meal. And then I know that, study after study shows that the order of nutrients that you eat, especially in the first meal, can really determine the path of your day. So I'm very intentional of not eating refined carbohydrates and sugar as my first food that I eat. I usually go fiber, protein forward, along with my chai, because I love tea with spices. So I usually do, and there's a ritual aspect to having tea. It's also reduces DNA damage by 25%. Actually, coffee does too. They're actually very, very healthy for you, as long as you're not adding a lot of sugar and additives to it. And so I break my fast, and then I'm off to the day. And it just sets me up for a great day. Like, if I don't do that morning routine, and even when I travel, I do at least a shortened version. It's not, it's not an hour or two like it usually is, but it's a couple of minutes. But I do a mini version of that because I think that it sets you up. It prepares your mind and your body for the day, and it helps me show up as my best self. And like we said, sometimes these healthy habits and routines, it becomes so routine that some days when you wake up unmotivated to do it, you just do it because it's out of habit. And once I do it, I feel so much better. And then I'm setting up the momentum for the day.
That's so awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Also, that additional nugget of like, even when you travel,
Yeah.
you're taking that with you. The neuro association is there and it puts you in that state, so super good stuff. Listen, you're one of my favorite people in this space and I appreciate you so much. Could you share, number one, where people can follow you, get more information? You do some great stuff on Instagram, by the way, and also where people can pick up your book.
Well, it goes right back to you are one of my favorite people in the wellness community. You have so much amazing science to share, but you're also a really amazing person and colleague in this world. So thank you for what you do for everyone and for being such a collaborative, amazing person. You can find me at FastingMD on Instagram. AmyMDWellness.com is my website. And Amy Shah MD on Twitter and Facebook.
Awesome. And your book?
My book is called I'm So Effing Tired. And actually, the paperback just came out a few days ago. So I'm excited about getting that to the world. It's so funny, Shawn. I put so much pressure on myself as a first-time author to make this book, the best thing it ever could. And then about a week into it, I realized I'm killing myself and I'm killing my creativity and my vibe and the energy I put out into the world, and I'm putting so much pressure. So I did what runners do. I decided to put 85% effort, and then for that last 15%, I just wanted to have fun and relax and be in the moment. And then everything started to change because my energy changed, my way of speaking about it, interacting with people changed, and all of a sudden the book got to reach the people that I wanted to. And it was actually, Fortune just named it one of the top 5 business books of 2021. So I was excited about that.
Boom. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
Looking at where ketos came from, why they existed in the first place. And it turns out that the exact opposite of what almost all of us preach is actually happening. Ketones are horrible. They're a fuel primarily designed to tide the brain over temporarily